In 2005 and 2006, documentary filmmaker Paul Kimball polled a select group of the world's leading UFO researchers. He asked each for a list of their 10 best UFO cases of all time. The cases were assigned point values, then averaged together. Over 70 UFO incidents from around the world received votes. At the end of the process, the following 10 incidents comprised the best evidence UFO cases of all time. Though unidentified flying objects first gained a place in modern culture with Kenneth Arnold's sighting in 1947, and the thousands upon thousands of sightings ever since, the phenomenon itself was known long before that, from reports of airships in the late 19th century all the way back to biblical times.
It appears to me that one can make a good case that there's nothing new about flying saucers. Earthlings have observed strange things flying in the sky that weren't birds. After all, before we were flying airplanes or balloons, what else was flying in the sky besides birds?
The history of this thing seems to go back, if not hundreds, thousands of years. We have portraits painted back in the 1400s and 1300s, and before that, Japanese wood carvings and so on, depicting these things. And I don't know, it's pretty hard to blow it off when you see these things, and they look pretty much the same as what everybody's reporting now. Did they know something we didn't know back then, or did they assume something we don't assume now?
Of all the artistic portrayals of what may be UFOs from the pre-1947 era, perhaps the most important can be found in a wood carving of an incident that occurred in 1561 in Nuremberg, Germany. At dawn on April 14, 1561, the skies over Nuremberg were reportedly filled with a multitude of objects, seemingly engaged in an aerial battle. Small spheres and disks were said to emerge from large cylinders. The objects were described in the Nuremberg Gazette as behaving in much the same way as some modern UFO reports, in that some of the objects would emerge from a larger object, or, as we might call it today, a mothership. But if these objects have been seen and recorded since antiquity, why have they become so much more prevalent in modern times? Stanton Friedman offers a theory.
Everybody in the neighborhood is concerned about their own survival and security. That means keeping tabs on the primitives in the neighborhood. And since they all know that things change with time, thinking beings have a habit of learning how to do things better and differently. You check them out every once in a while, but only closely once they show signs of being able to bother you. Boy, the end of World War II was certainly such a time. Evidence of nuclear weapon explosions, rockets being fired, and powerful electronics, radar systems and all that sort of stuff. So suddenly, it became incumbent upon the powers that be in the local neighborhood to check us out. Make sure we don't take our brand of friendship out there.
Probably the only unexplained astronaut UFO case on record is the Skylab 3 case from September 20th, 1973. In this case, 3 astronauts, Alan Bean, Jack Lausma, and the first scientist in space, Dr. Owen K. Garriott of Stanford University, sighted a bright red, flashing object outside their spacecraft. They observed it for 10 minutes and took 4 color photographs. Dr. Garriott measured the delay between when Skylab 3 went into the Earth's shadow and when the UFO went into the shadow. This gave him a distance measurement which showed the object to be between 25 and 30 miles away and over 800 feet in diameter.
Now that is extraordinary. No one has ever orbited an object over 1,000 feet in size in space. In fact, at that time in 1973, the Skylab itself was the largest object ever put in orbit.
I've spoken with a number of astronauts, and if you remember what the original requirements were, they had to be the best of the best. They all had to be pilots, for one thing. And pilots are familiar with things in the atmosphere. They don't live very long if they're not. So yes, I'm very impressed with astronauts. Are they 100% perfect about everything? Of course not, but that isn't the question. Are they as dependable as anybody else? I'd say yes, more so than most.
What makes this a great case is that you have the highest caliber of witnesses imaginable. You have photographic data, you have optical ranging data, and you have size data from a combination of all that. There's nothing like it in history.
One of the hallmarks of a best evidence UFO case is one where there are multiple independent witnesses who all observe the same thing. On December 11, 1996, in 3 separate areas along the Klondike Highway in Canada's Yukon Territory, dozens of witnesses observed a massive UFO that has been estimated to have been almost a mile in length.
The Yukon case is emblematic of what a good case should be. I mean, sure, we'd like to have a piece of the craft. We'd like to have the crew member introduced for dinner, but multiple independent witnesses lasting a long time describing something that's way outside the norm. There's no way you can make it into a 747, for example. And big, but this was much, much bigger than a 747.
The first sightings occurred at approximately 8:30 p.m. at Fox Lake, where 6 witnesses reported seeing a huge UFO moving slowly across the frozen lake. They described a smooth and solid object that did not make any noise. Less than half an hour later, in the village of Pelly Crossing, a 2-hour drive north of Fox Lake, other groups of witnesses observed the same UFO. Shortly thereafter, in the village of Carmax, 4 men in a truck and a family of 5 through their living room window also sighted the UFO. What did all of these witnesses see that cold December night in 1996? How could a UFO be so large? Stanton Friedman has a theory.
I like it partly because I've often talked about you'd use a very large vehicle to go between the stars and small Earth excursion modules to flit around down in the atmosphere where you've got big gravity, high pressure, all the other things. So I like the case. It's got a lot of data, careful investigation, just a top-notch example of good UFO story.
Did dozens of people in Canada's Yukon Territory see an extraterrestrial version of an aircraft carrier in December 1996? 10 years later, after thorough investigation, all that can really be said was that they saw a flying object that remains unidentified. Perhaps no UFO case is more worrying than one which appears to compromise national security, and there are few places more secure than a nuclear missile launch site, like the one near Malmstrom, Montana, at which Captain Robert Salas was stationed one morning in March 1967.
Early in the morning, and I get a call from the topside flight security controller or guard, and he said that a few of the guards had been seeing some strange lights flying around in very strange ways, making very rapid movements, stopping, making very sharp turns. So I just kind of discounted it and basically hung up on him. He calls back about 5 minutes later. This time he's very agitated. He's yelling into the phone.